Good evening, everyone. We come to another important moment in the country's political history, a moment missed 36 days ago, election night, when it was too close to call, and the two presidential campaigns continued right on. In the next hour or so, Al Gore will concede the election. President-elect George Bush will begin to settle the nation down if he can. These two important addresses tonight will go into the history books, as all such speeches do, and in many ways set the immediate tone for these two careers, two men from very similar backgrounds who have traveled very different roads. First tonight, we'll hear from Mr. Gore, the winner of the popular vote in the country, whose supporters throughout the country tonight are sad and depressed, and in some cases angry. He will undoubtedly tell us that it's important now to pull together. A very, very tough fighter about to speak to us tonight from the ceremonial office in the old Executive Office building with his family with him.
Good evening. Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming the 43rd President of the United States. And I promised him that I wouldn't call him back this time. I offered to meet with him as soon as possible so that we can start to heal the divisions of the campaign and the contest through which we've just passed. Almost a century and a half ago, Senator Stephen Douglas told Abraham Lincoln, who had just defeated him for the presidency, "Partisan feeling must yield to patriotism." I'm with you, Mr. President, and God bless you. Well, in that same spirit, I say to President-elect Bush that what remains of partisan rancor must now be put aside, and may God bless his stewardship of this country. Neither he nor I anticipated this long and difficult road. Certainly neither of us wanted it to happen. Yet it came, and now it has ended, resolved as it must be resolved through the honored institutions of our democracy. Over the library of one of our great law schools is inscribed the motto, "Not under man, but under God and law." That's the ruling principle of American freedom, the source of our democratic liberties. I've tried to make it my guide throughout this contest, as it has guided America's deliberations of all the complex issues of the past 5 weeks. Now the U.S. Supreme Court has spoken. Let there be no doubt, while I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it. I accept the finality of this outcome, which will be ratified next Monday in the Electoral College. And tonight, for the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession. I also accept my responsibility, which I will discharge unconditionally, to honor the new president-elect and do everything possible to help him bring Americans together in fulfillment of the great vision that our Declaration of Independence defines and that our Constitution affirms and defends. Let me say how grateful I am to all those who supported me and supported the cause for which we have fought. Tipper and I feel a deep gratitude to Joe and Hadassah Lieberman, who brought passion and high purpose to our partnership and opened new doors, not just for our campaign, but for our country. This has been an extraordinary election, but in one of God's unforeseen paths, this belatedly broken impasse can point us all to a new common ground, for its very closeness can serve to remind us that we are one people with a shared history and a shared destiny. Indeed, that history gives us many examples of contests as hotly debated, as fiercely fought, with their own challenges to the popular will. Other disputes have dragged on for weeks before reaching resolution. And each time, both the victor and the vanquished have accepted the result peacefully and in a spirit of reconciliation. So let it be with us. I know that many of my supporters are disappointed. I am too. But our disappointment must be overcome by our love of country. And I say to our fellow members of the world community, let no one see this contest as a sign of American weakness. The strength of American democracy is shown most clearly through the difficulties it can overcome. Some have expressed concern that the unusual nature of this election might hamper the next president in the conduct of his office. I do not believe it need be so. President-elect Bush inherits a nation whose citizens will be ready to assist him in the conduct of his large responsibilities. I personally will be at his disposal, and I call on all Americans. I particularly urge all who stood with us to unite behind our next president. This is America. Just as we fight hard when the stakes are high, we close ranks and come together when the contest is done. And while there will be time enough to debate our continuing differences, now is the time to recognize that that which unites us is greater than that which divides us. While we yet hold and do not yield our opposing beliefs, there is a higher duty than the one we owe to political party. This is America, and we put country before party. We will stand together behind our new president. As for what I'll do next, I don't know the answer to that one yet. Like many of you, I'm looking forward to spending the holidays with family and old friends. I know I'll spend time in Tennessee and mend some fences, literally and figuratively. Some have asked whether I have any regrets, and I do have one regret, that I didn't get the chance to stay and fight for the American people over the next 4 years, especially for those who need burdens lifted and barriers removed, especially for those who feel their voices have not been heard. I heard you, and I will not forget. I've seen America in this campaign, and I like what I see. It's worth fighting for, and that's a fight I'll never stop. As for the battle that ends tonight, I do believe, as my father once said, that no matter how hard the loss, defeat may serve as well as victory to shake the soul and let the glory out. So for me, this campaign ends as it began, with the love of Tipper and our family, with faith in God and in the country I have been so proud to serve, from Vietnam to the vice presidency, and with gratitude to our truly tireless campaign staff and volunteers, including all those who worked so hard in Florida for the last 36 days. Now the political struggle is over, and we turn again to the unending struggle for the common good of all Americans and for those multitudes around the world who look to us for leadership in the cause of freedom. In the words of our great hymn, America, America, let us crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. And now, my friends, in a phrase I once addressed to others, it's time for me to go. Thank you, and good night, and God bless America.
Vice President Gore in the ceremonial office of the old executive office building. Time for him to go, he said. Everybody in the country will have their own deep impression, I think, about what they have seen and heard. Let me talk to my colleagues. Just a very first impression, George Stephanopoulos, our political analyst, you know, that is the most relaxed and the most personal and the calmest I've seen Al Gore almost in the entire campaign.
Calmest, as if a burden has been lifted not only from the country, Peter, but from him, because he knows he's fought for the principles he said that he believed in over the course of the campaign. Also, remarkably statesmanlike, Peter, he did reach out immediately to Governor Bush at the top of the speech, saying that partisanship must yield to patriotism. I will unite behind you. What struck me, though, also, Peter, is he had this personal revelation. He says, I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I think there were an awful lot of hints there that he will be back. He said, I strongly disagree with that Supreme Court decision. He said there will be time to debate differences later, and he reminded people of those voices not heard in this campaign, perhaps the votes that were not counted.
We'll come back to talk in a moment about what Al Gore might next do. First impressions, Mark Halperin, our political director.
I don't think there was a single word in there that anyone in Austin, Texas would have been bothered by. Incredibly gracious, almost could have been written by Governor Bush's speechwriting staff. The central theme over and over, the contest is over, the fighting is over, coming together as Americans is so important. If Governor Bush has a chance to succeed right away, I think that speech certainly helps him, because no Democrat who respects Al Gore could look at that as any sign of anything but people should support now Governor Bush and give him a chance to succeed.
Let me see if I can, however, look into a bit. Strongly disagree with the court. Certainly his allies are very angry in many cases tonight. This has been a challenge to the popular will, a reminder that he won the popular vote by just under 400,000 votes. And while he talked about uniting the country and closing ranks, he did make reference to an unusual election which he speculated might hamper Governor Bush.
He did, but his support was for Governor Bush. Clearly their Democrats are unhappy, but there's nothing they could key off of in that speech to say Al Gore wants us right now to continue the fight. There's no illusions here. After a time, of course there'll be more partisanship, but right now in this critical period as Governor Bush tries to establish himself from a very tough position, I think he couldn't have asked for more help from Al Gore.
To Washington for first impressions from Cokie Roberts and then Sam Donaldson.
You know, one of the things that's so interesting, Peter, is often after a presidential race, when we look at the loser, we say, why couldn't he have been like that during the campaign? And I think that that was the case with Al Gore tonight. He came on, and so often during the campaign when he came on TV, he was annoying. There was nothing annoying about this. It was gracious. It was beautifully written. It touched on history. And yes, there were some phrases in there that people would be able to pick up on. Stay and fight, the phrase that he used against Bill Bradley during the primaries, and then used during the general election, that he was going to fight for you. And he's saying, I wish I could stay and fight, and leaving it open to other people. And some of them said today, Charles Rangel, it's not his to concede, it's our fight, speaking for African Americans. So there's some things, but by and large, first impression, good speech.
One other thing which I thought you might have noticed, particularly Cokie, his father, saying, my father used to say, shake the soul and get the glory out. Very Southern.
And his accent was more Southern tonight than it often is. But I think in these moments you often go back to your childhood.
Thank you very much. We'll come to talk about the long road since his childhood in just a moment. Sam Donaldson.
Peter, I don't think I've ever heard a more gracious concession speech. In the last 40 years, I've covered a lot of elections, covered a lot of losers. I've never heard one like this. From the moment he started with a little humor, I promise I wouldn't call him back, till the very end, it was a speech as if every word was carefully crafted, but not only carefully crafted, meant. I mean, we often look at politicians and we say, yeah, that's what he said, but he means something else. I think Al Gore tonight meant what he said. He certainly gave that impression, and I think he did a wonderful thing toward trying to unite this country.
Thank you, Sam. I want to go to Terry Moran, who has covered Vice President Gore since the very beginning of this campaign, and for a change is not outside the Vice President's official residence, but overlooking the White House tonight. Terry, Mr. Gore said, I say to President-elect Bush that what remains of partisan rancor must now be put aside, and may God bless his stewardship of the country. Does his staff and do his supporters feel similarly?
Well, they didn't, that's for sure, up until about 10 minutes ago, and it remains to be seen how much of what we've heard will salve the wounds that have been opened by this election battle. But I must say I concur with my colleagues. What good humor, what aptness, even grace, and at times bordering on nobility of expression, what touch and grasp of the undercurrents and the yearnings in this political moment. This was a political act of excellence that we have not seen from Al Gore throughout this campaign, and also, once again, perhaps going back to his upbringing, that sense of duty, of the dutiful son, and then the dutiful soldier, and the dutiful senator and vice president, and now the dutiful loser, doing what he saw as his duty tonight.
We'll come back and again talk about his future, but perhaps Terry's allusion to humor was the very first reference when I called Mr. Gore and said this time wouldn't call him back. Of course, a reference to election night when he first called and appeared to concede, and then called back and said he had actually changed his mind. To our resident historian, Michael Beschloss.
Well, you know, another piece of humor, Peter, was that line he uses in the speech, in something I once addressed to others, it's time for me to go. That's just amazing, because that was the line that Al Gore used in the 1992 campaign, running for vice president alongside Bill Clinton, talking about George Bush Sr. and that administration, saying, what time is it? And the crowds would shout, it's time for them to go. Humor is usually the thing that really separates out a concession speech. Sure did here. I thought it was gracious, healing, unifying, just magnificent. And the other thing, Peter, he closed it by quoting those words from America the Beautiful, "Crown thy good with brotherhood." Those were exactly the words that Lyndon Johnson used in November of 1963, 2 days after John Kennedy's funeral, to heal the nation, bring us together. I think they'll have that same effect tonight.
Thank you, Michael. We'll come back to you as well. Perhaps there's a tendency to be disposed towards generosity on occasion like this. Won't make that judgment, but we'll go to ABC's Dean Reynolds, who covers the Bush campaign in Austin. Dean, this has been astonishingly almost vicious on occasion in the latter stages of this campaign. How do you think this will go down with the Bush campaign?
Well, I agree with what Mark Halperin just said, Peter. They could have written it themselves. This speech was extremely gracious. It's the kind of speech that Governor Bush will really, truly appreciate. And we learned this evening that in the course of their phone call, which took place about 8 minutes before the hour, that the two men agreed to meet next Tuesday in Washington. The governor will be going to Washington perhaps on Sunday and may stay through Tuesday, and apparently the two of them will get together, and there'll probably be another session with the two of them face-to-face, calling on the country to unify behind the new president.
Thanks, Dean. Picking up on this reference to those who say that perhaps the result will hamper President-elect Bush when he gets to the Congress, to Capitol Hill, and ABC's Linda Douglas. Linda, based on listening to you in some of your emails today and the conversations you and others have had up there, there's not much graciousness up in that establishment at the moment.
That's true, Peter, although this speech may go considerable ways in changing the tone that we did hear up here today. Republicans did say that the tone would be set initially by Al Gore's speech, but there was a message in Al Gore's speech tonight which appeals to the angriest of the Democrats, and those are the African Americans. Those are the ones who are not opening their arms to George Bush. Mr. Gore said he wanted to continue fighting to lift the burden and remove the barriers. That was definitely a message to African Americans who feel that they were the ones disenfranchised in all this. They are the angriest here, and they are driving the Democrats not to be compromising. Okay, Linda, thanks very much. The Vice President is going to leave the Executive Office building now and go back to his residence, where he will continue to live until January. A large number of his staff have managed to, not have managed, are inside the compound there tonight between the White House and the Executive Office building, and they have come to greet him as he leaves the ceremonial room in the Executive Office building, a place where he very much liked to give lunches, where he very often spent lunches exchanging ideas with specialists in every walk of life in which he was interested, where he on occasion entertained the press when he wished to talk about a particular subject and make an impression on reporters. A man generally pretty accessible to reporters, except on the campaign trail. As we just watch that, perhaps we can just keep the cameras on that particular place at the moment and talk a little bit, George Stephanopoulos, about how he keeps alive at this point all of his interests.
Well, I think he probably doesn't know exactly yet, because this is a man who has served in government, Peter, for so long, in the House, in the Senate, 8 full years as vice president. He hasn't really known much of an adult life beyond some early days in the military and then as a reporter back in Tennessee outside of government life. I think it will be important for him to go back, get some perspective, maybe reflect on the campaign. He has written a book before. Perhaps he can do that again. But as I said earlier, Peter, I really do believe he'll also be looking to keep his political interests in line. Whenever someone gets this close, it's awful hard to walk away.
Mark Halperin, pick up the political notion of what becomes of Al Gore politically. He remains certainly as leader of his party for the foreseeable future.
Well, let's see how long that lasts. You know, whenever a party loses the run for the White House, there's the question, does that person become the front runner for next time if they haven't served already? Al Gore certainly is thinking about that. He's told associates that that's a possibility. And the question for the Democratic Party is, does the reason Al Gore lost have anything to do with the lack of appeal of the Democratic Party? Clearly in a close race, the country's so evenly divided, but does he shape the Democratic Party in terms of policy? Does he continue to lead the party is a very open question.
Michael Beschloss, pick up on this, if you would. Historical comparisons are not always apt, but where's the historical comparison for a man in this position?
The most direct one is one we've talked about, and that is Andrew Jackson in 1824, who was not anywhere near this gracious when he felt that he was sort of forced out of the presidency by Henry Clay, and another son of a president, John Quincy Adams, he said, essentially, I've been robbed, went back to Tennessee, resigned from the Senate, and began his campaign for 4 years later. And that was a successful one because he gave himself a movement. He was the one in favor of reform. And there are a lot of people tonight who are urging Al Gore to do the same thing, to be the candidate of campaign finance reform, uniform ballot, perhaps some things he didn't even propose during this campaign, feeling that that might give a fire to a future candidacy that we didn't see during this long year.
Thank you very much, Michael. We're told that Mr. Gore will not be out for a minute or two, so we'll be back in a minute.
This ABC News special report will continue in a moment.
I used to believe in cellular too. All the stuff about free long distance, it was mostly make-believe. But it's okay. Turns out real nationwide long distance does exist. We can call from anywhere to anywhere in the country, and there are no extra charges. And it's all digital, so it's clear.
Does Mom know?
Yeah, she knows.
Sprint PCS, 1,500 minutes with nationwide long distance for just $34.99.
These days, retirement can come sooner than you think. Schwab can help you set up a tax-deferred IRA rollover account online in just a few easy steps, so you can get the most out of your golden years. Visit us at schwabwelcome.com, where every investor is welcome.
Little kids and Christmas. Nothing fits better than Fisher-Price. Toys R Us has the biggest selection of Fisher-Price anywhere. And right now it's our biggest Fisher-Price sale of the year. It's the best time of year to be a Toys R Us kid.
The middle of the evening, December the 13th, 2000, outside the old Executive Office building, the Secret Service preceding Mr. Gore as he leaves with his family to go back to the Vice President's residence. He saw his wife Tipper with him, of course, smiling, as she always does. His two daughters, who've worked very hard on this campaign, his daughter particularly, Corinna, looking stern. She was clearly one of the militants in the campaign to keeping the fight going. And Joe Lieberman, Senator Joe Lieberman of Connecticut, who is still the senator from Connecticut and now a very controversial figure as a new term of the Congress begins, along with his wife, who brought, at the time of the convention, you may remember, such spark to the campaign and seemed to brighten up Al Gore almost as much as his wife always does. He's shaken so many hands in so many places all across the country. He said in these remarks that his revelations, or his re-revelations in many ways, about what a great country it was, had left him refreshed. And while this has the familiar look of a political campaign, it looks a good deal more relaxed, almost intimate. Vice President Mondale once, when asked, does it ever stop hurting, said, I'll let you know. But this is surely this expression of affection for the Vice President, whatever the political second-guessing that goes on in the days ahead, must be, at least momentarily, very reassuring. George Stephanopoulos.
It is, Peter, and I think this, as we have said, will go a long way towards healing the country. I think it's also time to reflect, as you were talking earlier about Al Gore's contributions, I think, to the country. When I think of what he's done, particularly as Vice President, one of his unsung contributions was standing up to the carnage in the early 1990s in former Yugoslavia. As Slobodan Milosevic was directing massacres against the Bosnian Muslims, Al Gore was a powerful, passionate voice for standing up against that carnage. The United States may have gotten in too late. We would have gotten in even later had it not been for Vice President Gore.
Cokie Roberts in Washington, we didn't come to bury Al Gore tonight by any means, but what is his significant contribution until now as far as you're concerned?
Well, in covering him in Congress, Peter, he was certainly one of the most foresighted people in Congress in terms of technology, all the joking about the internet, but in fact he was very involved in new technologies and certainly in the environment. But also I think the political contribution, and this is something that is kind of curious given where we are now, is that he was very instrumental in trying to bring the Democratic Party back to the middle. It had lost badly with Northern liberals, Mondale, McGovern, Dukakis, Humphrey. And only with Johnson and Carter had it won. And he was trying to effect that kind of change, which of course Clinton carried out. But then in this campaign, he seemed to move back. And now you have a Democratic Party where you do have, as Linda Douglas said earlier, the African Americans very, very angry as a result of this campaign. But then other Democrats in Congress talking about how do we get to rural white men. So there's a big split in the party, and that's going to affect his political future.
One comment now from ABC's Jackie Judd, who joined us from Washington. Jackie, you have been through all of the legal fight with this with Mr. Gore. Was there anybody in the entire campaign who was more determined than him?
Oh, no, not at all, Peter. And what struck me tonight about the few minutes that he spoke to the nation was that over the past 5 weeks, we have been so steeped in that legal maneuvering, in the political entanglements, and there was this quiet, beautifully delivered speech in which you were reminded this is a human struggle. At its base, it was a human struggle between two men, and I just found it very poignant.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Final comment from Sam Donaldson in Washington. Very quickly, Sam, on greatest contribution?
I think his environmental stance. People like to deride him about it. His critics like to laugh a bit about it. But global warming and a whole host of issues, Peter. Al Gore has been the signal carrier in the night of the warning that if we don't do something about this, we're all going to perish. Sounds silly, but it's a wonderful contribution to alarm us about.
Thanks very much, Sam Donaldson. Now, 36 days after the election was supposed to be resolved, I offer my concession to the nation. Now let us show you how things changed. The Texas legislature, 30 minutes from now, I hope you'll join us again when we'll go to Texas, where President-elect Bush will address the nation. Clearly, in part, he will say something in response to Mr. Gore. Clearly, in part, he will pick up the notion Mr. Gore has already advanced. At a time like this, loyalty to the country is more important than loyalty to the party. I hope you'll join us in 30 minutes. On behalf of my colleagues, I'm Peter Jennings.
This has been an ABC News special report. For continuing coverage, stay with ABC News and abcnews.com.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
This is an ABC News special report. ABC 2000, now reporting Peter Jennings.
Good evening, everyone. Hello again. In some cases, as we said less than an hour ago, this is an important moment in the nation's political history. An hour ago, Vice President Gore conceded the election to Governor George Bush of Texas. Now it is the 43rd President-elect's turn to set the tone for his presidency, which lies ahead. The governor is going to speak from the legislature in Texas. It has been a long and bitter contest for the most powerful job in the world. Mr. Gore told the nation that it was now time for partisanship to yield to patriotism. He accepted the ruling of the Supreme Court, which cost him the election, though he strongly disagreed with its decision.
Accept my responsibility, which I will discharge unconditionally, to honor the new president-elect and do everything possible to help him bring Americans together in fulfillment of the great vision that our Declaration of Independence defines and that our Constitution affirms and defends.
Mr. Gore said it was an unusual election, but in the most gracious way. He said this should not hamper Mr. Bush. Americans, he said, closed ranks when the contest was done. And then in the Executive Office Building, giving his daughter Corinna a hug, her husband Drew Schiff, his daughter Kristen, his brother-in-law Frank Hunger, his third daughter, and his son Albert III. A very emotional and very gracious speech to the nation, which, as our correspondent who covers Mr. Bush and has covered him throughout the campaign said could have been written by the Bush campaign itself. It was that generous in spirit. Our political analyst, George Stephanopoulos, was here to hear it with us. I think a great many people were, if not surprised by the graciousness in this speech, but the degree to which he was gracious.
Right, the degree of magnanimity and the degree, it wasn't only the words, but it was his body language, his tone, the ease with which he seemed to deliver these words after what was such a bitterly fought campaign. And when we heard consistently in this post-election contest, he was a man who was determined not to give up, didn't even think about the possibility of loss until after that Supreme Court decision yesterday.
Now our political director, Mark Halperin, is with us. Governor Bush is going to speak from the Texas House of Representatives. Why?
Governor Bush based his campaign, even before this wild end to this election with the parties so divided, based a lot of his campaign on saying, I'm a uniter. I've worked in Texas with Democrats. I can go to Washington and have Republicans and Democrats work together.
And we go now then to the Texas House of Representatives. In the Texas legislature, Governor Bush and his wife, Laura. The House of Representatives full this evening with Texas legislators, with his supporters from the state and from elsewhere in the country, with his friends and his family and his staff. This man who has said in the last several weeks, time and again, in a very determined way, that he and Governor Cheney had won the state of Florida, but now wins one of the most significant elections in modern times.
Thank you very much.
By a fraction of an electoral vote and by one vote in the Supreme Court.
Thank you very much. Good evening, my fellow Americans. I appreciate so very much the opportunity to speak with you tonight. Mr. Speaker, Lieutenant Governor, friends, distinguished guests. Our country has been through a long and trying period, with the outcome of the presidential election not finalized for longer than any of us could ever imagine. Vice President Gore and I put our hearts and hopes into our campaigns. We both gave it our all. We shared similar emotions, so I understand how difficult this moment must be for Vice President Gore and his family. He has a distinguished record of service to our country as a congressman, a senator, and a vice president. This evening I received a gracious call from the vice president. We agreed to meet early next week in Washington, and we agreed to do our best to heal our country after this hard-fought contest. Tonight I want to thank all the thousands of volunteers and campaign workers who worked so hard on my behalf. I also salute the vice president and his supporters for waging a spirited campaign. And I thank him for a call that I know was difficult to make. Laura and I wish the Vice President and Senator Lieberman and their families the very best. I have a lot to be thankful for tonight. I'm thankful for America, and thankful that we were able to resolve our electoral differences in a peaceful way. I'm thankful to the American people for the great privilege of being able to serve as your next president. I want to thank my wife and our daughters for their love. Laura's active involvement as First Lady has made Texas a better place, and she will be a wonderful First Lady of America. I am proud to have Dick Cheney by my side, and America will be proud to have him as our next Vice President. Tonight I chose to speak from the chamber of the Texas House of Representatives because it has been a home to bipartisan cooperation. Here in a place where Democrats have the majority, Republicans and Democrats have worked together to do what is right for the people we represent. We've had spirited disagreements, and in the end, we found constructive consensus. It is an experience I will always carry with me, an example I will always follow. I want to thank my friend House Speaker Pete Laney, a Democrat, who introduced me today. I want to thank the legislators from both political parties with whom I've worked. Across the hall in our Texas Capitol is the state Senate, and I cannot help but think of our mutual friend, the former Democrat Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock. His love for Texas and his ability to work in a bipartisan way continue to be a model for all of us. The spirit of cooperation I have seen in this hall is what is needed in Washington, D.C. It is the challenge of our moment. After a difficult election, we must put politics behind us and work together to make the promise of America available for every one of our citizens. I'm optimistic that we can change the tone in Washington, D.C. I believe things happen for a reason, and I hope the long wait of the last 5 weeks will heighten a desire to move beyond the bitterness and partisanship of the recent past. Our nation must rise above a house divided. Americans share hopes and goals and values far more important than any political disagreements. Republicans want the best for our nation, and so do Democrats. Our votes may differ, but not our hopes. I know America wants reconciliation and unity. I know Americans want progress, and we must seize this moment and deliver. Together, guided by a spirit of common sense, common courtesy, and common goals, we can unite and inspire the American citizens. Together, we will work to make all our public schools excellent, teaching every student of every background and every accent so that no child is left behind. Together we will save Social Security and renew its promise of a secure retirement for generations to come. Together we will strengthen Medicare and offer prescription drug coverage to all of our seniors. Together we will give Americans the broad, fair, and fiscally responsible tax relief they deserve. Together we will have a bipartisan foreign policy, true to our values and true to our friends. And we will have a military equal to every challenge and superior to every adversary. Together we will address some of society's deepest problems, one person at a time, by encouraging and empowering the good hearts and good works of the American people. This is the essence of compassionate conservatism, and it will be a foundation of my administration. These priorities are not merely Republican concerns or Democratic concerns. They are American responsibilities. During the fall campaign, we differed about the details of these proposals, but there was remarkable consensus about the important issues before us: excellent schools, retirement and health security, tax relief, a strong military, a more civil society. We have discussed our differences. Now it is time to find common ground and build consensus to make America a beacon of opportunity in the 21st century. I'm optimistic this can happen. Our future demands it, and our history proves it. 200 years ago, in the election of 1800, America faced another close presidential election. A tie in the Electoral College put the outcome into the hands of Congress. After 6 days of voting and 36 ballots, the House of Representatives elected Thomas Jefferson, the third President of the United States. That election brought the first transfer of power from one party to another in our new democracy. Shortly after the election, Jefferson, in a letter titled Reconciliation and Reform, wrote this: "The steady character of our countrymen is a rock to which we may safely moor. Unequivocal in principle, reasonable in manner, we should be able to hope to do a great deal of good to the cause of freedom and harmony." 200 years have only strengthened the steady character of America. And so as we begin the work of healing our nation, tonight I call upon that character: respect for each other, respect for our differences, generosity of spirit, and a willingness to work hard and work together to solve any problem. I have something else to ask you, to ask every American. I ask for you to pray for this great nation. I ask for your prayers for leaders from both parties. I thank you for your prayers for me and my family. And I ask you to pray for Vice President Gore and his family. I have faith that with God's help, we as a nation will move forward together as one nation, indivisible. And together we will create an America that is open, so every citizen has access to the American dream. An America that is educated, so every child has the keys to realize that dream. And an America that is united in our diversity and our shared American values that are larger than race or party. I was not elected to serve one party, but to serve one nation. The President of the United States is the President of every single American, of every race and every background. Whether you voted for me or not, I will do my best to serve your interests, and I will work to earn your respect. I will be guided by President Jefferson's sense of purpose, to stand for principle, to be reasonable in manner, and above all, to do great good for the cause of freedom and harmony. The presidency is more than an honor. It is more than an office. It is a charge to keep, and I will give it my all. Thank you very much, and God bless America.
The 43rd president-elect of the nation in the Texas legislature tonight, where there was a sign over the door asking people to refrain from chanting and whistling, to keep signs out of the way, to keep flash cameras or video cameras out of sight, thereby not giving people the opportunity to record yet another historic moment this evening. And please stay in the area around your seat. The tone for tonight, the admonition was, is respectful and dignified. And there, George Stephanopoulos, as we see the Christmas tree in the middle of the legislature, a speech similarly relaxed to Vice President Gore's concession teaching earlier, more relaxed than we've seen George W. Bush, I think, on the campaign trail, touching briefly on all of the goals that we've heard him touch on before in the long election campaign.
That's exactly right, Peter. He wanted to be a unifier, not a divider, as he said. And I think the speech was appropriately subdued, yet very sincere. You know, what animated Governor Bush throughout this whole campaign, more than any single policy, was this idea of bringing people together. And it seemed as he delivered the speech as that that's really the message he wanted to convey more than anything else tonight. And boy, does he have his work cut out for him.
Well, we'll talk in a moment about how much of the challenge he's going to face as he goes to the Washington, which he has argued has been so partisan and so bitterly divided in the last 8 years, particularly in the last 4. But he says in this initial speech, try to set the tone for his news presidency. I was not elected to serve one party, to serve one nation. We could go many directions, and as always, we're very aware that people watching it at home may have very different impressions. But I want to bring in, first of all, if I may, Michael Beschloss, who is our resident historian. Michael, to comment on that letter which Mr. Bush referred to, that Thomas Jefferson wrote very shortly after the election of 1800.
Well, Jefferson not only exactly 200 years ago, but had been through a similar trauma. Those 36 ballots, tie election, finally came to Jefferson after a number of surprises. And you know, Peter, the other thing, we've been talking the last few days about the fact that these other presidents who were elected with a popular minority electoral vote majority all served only one term. Take a look at Thomas Jefferson. He served 2.
Okay, thank you, Michael. We'll come back to you before this is over. I'm going to go quickly around my various colleagues this evening and just ask for first impressions. Our political director, Mark Halperin, is here. You cannot help but notice the difference in these two speeches. One is, in Mr. Gore's, a reflection, and this is, in many respects, trying to meet the challenge.
That's right, and George talked about his thematic challenge of uniting the country. The country saw tonight something that's going to be a hallmark of Governor Bush's presidency, if he's successful, as it was in his governorship. He focuses on issues. He takes a small number of issues. In this case, in a pretty short speech, he listed education, Social Security, Medicare, tax cut, and military reform. He did that whole list twice in a pretty short speech. That's the big 5. That's what he wants to focus his legislative agenda on.
Thanks very much, Mark. This is, of course, much more political in nature and in fact than was Vice President Gore's. To Washington and ABC's Cokie Roberts. Cokie, just looking at the Congress as a whole, a House very closely divided, a Senate very closely divided, how high is the mountain for Mr. Bush?
It's very high. It's extremely high, and it's high not only with the people in the opposition party, but with people in his own party. You have a feisty Republican Party that has not had all 3 branches in a very long time. There are people who are saying, why should we give anything to the Democrats? Why should we have Democrats in the cabinet? Why should we be talking about moderation? It's ours. We want it. And this tone that Governor Bush set tonight is not one that is falling on a lot of welcome ears here. There's some, of course, in both parties. And it's interesting, the Bush campaign people told me during the campaign that they were amazed at how much this theme of changing the tone in Washington really made a difference out in the country. And if he can do it, it is quite a feat, but it's going to be very tough.
Let me ask a similar question to ABC's Sam Donaldson. Sam, how receptive is Washington, do you think, at the moment, given the pressure in the country, which Cokie speaks, for bipartisanship? Or is it even a good thing?
Well, bipartisanship is always a good thing if you win. I think that Washington is receptive. Washington is a town, pretty tough town, and I think it always looks at a new president and say, okay, let's take your measure. Of course, George Walker Bush had a father who knew a lot about Washington and taught him something about this. And so he doesn't come in completely as an outsider, as he tried to run to during the campaign. But Peter, you know, I'm struck by something as you watch tonight this man. The enormous satisfaction that he and the Bush family must feel. Do you remember in 1992 when his father conceded that election? Can you see them now, all up there? And Barbara Bush said to them, get over it, it's over. But I think of all of the kids, George Walker Bush thought it wasn't over, and he's been planning for 8 long years to be right where he is tonight, Peter.
Thank you, Sam. I think the governor and Mrs. Bush are going to walk back to the governor's mansion this evening, and after this long, very serious period of discord between him and between Mr. Bush, going back to the campaign itself, they had little good to say about each other in the course of the campaign. It only became more intense with election night and the calls that in many cases so disrupted the tone of the evening. But he will now go to Washington early in the week to see the Vice President. Mr. Gore called him this evening and spoke to him, about which we do not know, but one assumes it was at the very least a generous phone call in anticipation of the two of them meeting in Washington next week. Our coverage of this quite extraordinary process will continue in just a moment.
This ABC News special report will continue in a moment.
It's gonna get cold, so get to Burlington Coat Factory today for the best selection of coats on the planet. 15,000 coats in every store. The same famous label and designer coats you'll see in fine department stores, but at prices way lower than their sale prices. That's why millions of people buy their coats at Burlington Coat Factory. So be smart. For selection, quality, and savings, nobody comes close.
For sinus sufferers, it can start with a twinge or perhaps a slight pressure. For everyone, there's a signal. Your sinuses are gonna be trouble. Don't let it happen. Take Sudafed at the first sign. Untreated sinus pressure can escalate to pain. But now, taking Sudafed at the first sign releases pressure, so symptoms don't get worse.
The first sign of pressure, that's my signal.
Stop sinus pain before it starts. Take non-drowsy Sudafed at the first sign.
The new Wind Tunnel Bagless by Hoover. Wind Tunnel for clean, bagless for convenience. More than just easy, it's also quite powerful. Perhaps the world's best vacuum.
The one force that can change the way you drive is back with a vengeance. Toyotathon 01, Toyota's biggest sales event of the year, returns with great values on Toyota's best and newest performers, like the all-new Sequoia. Driving will never be the same. Toyotathon 01, the thrill is back. At your Toyota dealer now through January 2nd.
Now at Zales, you'll find this dazzling 2-carat diamond bracelet for only $279. And then you'll find Mommy kissing Santa Claus. At Zales stores nationwide or shop online at Zales.com.
Let's see if we can go back to have a quick look at Austin again, because it's only several blocks from the legislature to the governor's mansion. But Governor Bush did not walk tonight. And as you get a quick glimpse of this president-elect entourage going into the mansion itself, you get a hint of how life is going to change. Presidents do not walk anymore. The Secret Service a long time ago took away all the convertibles. There's very little access to the public, which is not under Secret Service control now. Look at the curtain went up outside the back door of the residence into which the governor and Mrs. Bush will now go. That is new. That is not something we saw throughout the campaign. You could come and go through that back door, and the governor was always very loose about it. But life is certainly going to change. On the subject of change, let's go to Linda Douglas, who's on Capitol Hill. Linda, as we went and came from commercial there was a picture of Mr. Bush and Mr. Cheney. Talk about Mr. Cheney and Mr. Bush on Capitol Hill, and whether or not there is a receptive mood up there for the legislation that he touches on.
Well, Dick Cheney is very popular here, certainly with Republicans having been in the House. He's going to have extraordinary power, both in the executive branch with George Bush and here in the legislative branch. He's going to break ties in the 50-50 Senate. He's now been given an office in the House. The Speaker gave him that today. And he met with Republicans who said, here's what you do to start right out with bipartisan legislation. Marriage penalty tax cut, that passed the Congress. Mr. Clinton vetoed it. A state tax cut, that passed the Congress, also vetoed. Conservatives then piped in with some advice. How about partial birth abortion ban? That has some support from Democrats. That will infuriate Democrats. So it sounds like the reaching out may still be difficult
Linda,
to do,
I want
Peter.
a quick prediction from you, if I may. Who is the new president going to have more difficulty with, Democrats or Republicans?
My prediction is he'll have more trouble with the conservatives, just as Cokie said. My prediction is Tom DeLay in the House, the firebrand conservative who has a lot of followers and doesn't want to give an inch.
Thanks very much. In other words, the Republicans in the conservative wing of the party. A quick visit now to ABC's Dean Reynolds, who's covered this campaign throughout. Dean, what Texas hallmarks of this presidency might we look forward to?
Well, one of the things they say here in Texas, Peter, is that Democrats are really Republicans with a thin coat of paint. And that means that the governor was able to achieve a great deal of success here in Texas by working both sides of the aisle. It'll be a completely different story, as Linda and Cokie and Sam have suggested, once he gets to Washington.
Thank you very much, Dean Ranzan. And last comment from ABC's George Stephanopoulos. What was missing from the speech tonight?
What was missing was any concrete policy that the Democrats would really seize on immediately. George Bush said he hoped that the partisanship of the last 5 weeks would lead to more cooperation right away. I think he's right on the sentiment, but he's going to have to make it concrete.
Thank you very much, and thank everybody else as well. So 2 speeches, 2 addresses to the nation tonight to move the country on. Mr. Gore being very generous and saying partisanship must yield to patriotism. Mr. Bush saying he was elected not to lead a party, but to lead a nation. I'm Peter Jennings. Thank you, and good night.
I announce that I am a candidate for President of the United States.
This nation does not want 4 more years of Clinton Gore.
Where's the Secret Service?
It's time to have new leadership in Washington, D.C.
Fight for you.
We trust the hard-working people of America.
They're for the powerful. We're for the people.
Mr. Chairman, I proudly accept your nomination.
And I stand here tonight as my own man.
This is a man, he's got great numbers. I'm beginning to think not only did he invent the internet, but he invented the calculator.
Governor Bush, you have attacked my character, and I am not going to respond in kind.
It all comes down to the state of Florida.
This triggers an automatic recount.
The courts will not decide this election.
While I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it.
I'm thankful to the American people for the great privilege of being able to serve as your next president.
This has been an ABC News special report. For continuing coverage, stay with ABC News and abcnews.com.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.